This is our fourth global town hall meeting with David this year, and as always, these events are much anticipated by all the people who have attended them in the past and people who have are attending this for the first time. We have always had a tremendous amount of learning, a tremendous amount of insight from David in these town hall webinars, and it also gives everyone in the who attends a great opportunity to ask questions to David directly and make it a very interactive event, wherein all of the people who attend are able to gain a lot of insight and knowledge about Kanban and about lean and agile implementations in their organizations and what everybody else is doing. So very warm welcome to all of you. As we wait for other people to join, we have nearly half of the people who are supposed to attend are already here. I'm just giving a couple of minutes to others as well. Let me just go through the agenda. We'll start off with some introductions and a quick word from the sponsor, that's swift-kanban and Digite, and after that I'll hand over the microphone to David, and he will really go through the rest of the webinar and present to you the state of Kanban land in 2012. And I'll leave it to David to talk a little bit more about that to introduce the topic. And after that, we will start with Q&A sessions. We expect the session today to go for about 90 minutes, in which David will present for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll leave the stage open for all of you to ask questions, and we will ask questions based on the sequence in which they are asked, and we will pass the microphone to you. So hopefully all of you who are listening in today and have questions are able to do so with a microphone that's attached to your computers, and can go ahead and interact with David and ask the questions verbally. So we look forward to a very interactive and intense Q&A session. And after that, we will do a wrap-up. Just to let you know, we will have these slides available for download afterwards, the ones that David will present. We will also have a recording of this webinar available, and we will follow up with everyone who attends today and share with you the links to listen to the recording and also to download the slides that you will see. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Today's panelist, of course, is David Anderson, and I do this introduction knowing fully well that most of you already know him very well, but for those who don't, David is a thought leader and a pioneer in the field of Lean Kanban for software development and managing effective software teams. He has over 25 years in the software industry, starting with the computer games in early 1980s. He's led software teams delivering great productivity and quality using innovative agile methods. David has by now written 3 books: Agile Management for Software Engineering, Applying the Theory of Constraints for Business Results; Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology and Business, which has really pretty much become the Bible for any team that's implementing Kanban, especially in software. And his latest book is Lessons in Agile Management, that's been out for just under a year, I guess, by now, and is getting great reviews as well. David is, of course, the president and CEO of DJ Anderson Associates, which provides consulting, coaching, and training services to organizations adopting Kanban and lean methods of software development, DevOps, and IT operations, besides other business functions. And last but not the least, we are very honored because David is an advisor to Digite and consults with us on overall product strategy, especially in the area of Lean Kanban. I'm your host. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm a co-founder at Digite and Senior Vice President for Product Management and Marketing at Digite, and I'll be coordinating the session today in order to make sure that we get the most out of this session. So a quick word, just a couple of slides on what Digite and swift-kanban are about, and I will get out of your way. So we've been a pioneer in web-based collaborative products and solutions for distributed teams based out of Mountain View, California, here in the Bay Area. Our products have over 300,000 users all over the world, and so we've been there. We've been around in this business for quite some time, understand the challenges of technology teams implementing productivity solutions and process improvement tools, and we really have a very good understanding of some of the challenges that our customers have solved using a variety of tools, including ours. Our products cover Lean Kanban Agile ALM and project portfolio management. And swift-kanban, of course, is our flagship Lean Kanban product. We've been covered by several analysts, including Gartner, in a variety of reports. So we do have a fair amount of recognition. And this is just a slide on some key customers that we have, and obviously you recognize names here that we have. Very large companies, so very small companies use our products to make their teams more effective. So with that quick introduction, again, for those of you who are just joining, I want to lay this out again, that we will have a Q&A session after David's presentation, and we will provide the opportunity to all of you who ask questions in the sequence in which they get asked, and we will do it over the microphone verbally so that you are able to ask the question properly, and maybe any follow-ups that you might want to do with David, and after that we'll do a wrap-up. So with that, I'm going to hand over to David. David, a very warm welcome to you on this webinar. I presume this might be the last one for 2012, and I think all of us are looking forward to what you would have to share and speak about, especially after the conference that we did in Europe. There you go. I think, David, you might have to go off mute.
Thank you, Mahesh. Thanks for that introduction. Can you see the slides, Mahesh?
Yes, I can.
So welcome everyone to the webinar this morning. Some of you will be aware that I gave a summary of the Kanban market during our conference in Boston in May this year. I called that State of Kanban Land. This is really just an update based on the 3 conferences which were recently held in Europe, and I thought I'd cover 1 or 2 of the popular topics which appeared there, and perhaps mention just a few things that happened during those conferences. So.
David, I think we lost your audio for some reason, and I see that you're showing on mute. Could you just go back onto? There you go.
Yeah. So where did you lose me, Mahesh? That's interesting because I didn't do anything at this end. Okay. Yeah. So some agenda items here. I'm going to cover just a few highlights. Obviously, with 3 conferences over a 10-day period of time, very difficult to summarize everything, so I'm picking out a few highlights. There's some reference material posted on the leankanban.eu website. That's the website for the Vienna conference. If during this session you want to discuss what we're talking about here over Twitter, you can use the webinar at swift-kanban hashtag. Sorry, not hashtag. And my own ID is Agile Manager. The European conferences were held in France, in Paris, and then in Vienna, the Central Europe Conference, and Utrecht in the Netherlands this year. And these were held over a 10-day period, sharing 3 out of 4 keynote speakers at each of the events. Stephen Parry, Donald Reynolds, and I delivered keynotes at all 3 events. And we had Steve Medland in the Netherlands and Vienna talking about Toyota Cata, and Dave Snowden in Vienna talking about his Cynefin framework and complexity. So picking just a few highlights from these events, Donald Rennison's keynote contained the ideas of whip constraints and whip controls, and he presented this set diagram where he described pull as a subset of the concept of whip constraints, and whip constraints as a subset of whip controls. And I'm sure that's making you think, well, what did he mean by these things? So whip constraints are the idea that we're limiting the work in progress. Perhaps in some ways a simpler concept than something like a Kanban system. And those of you familiar with the definition of the Kanban method will know that I use the term limit work in progress rather than implement a Kanban system. And Don Rennison's keynote speech really helped us understand why that's a better choice. So you see here, whip constraints prevent the system from entering high Q states, and the benefit is a significant improvement in cycle time at relatively low cost, but the trade-off is potentially there are blocking costs and our system may be underutilized. So there's a need for an economic framework to be able to evaluate whether overloading the system, allowing high Q states to build up, and improving utilization is a better choice than limiting the work in progress and suffering perhaps some blocking effects and some underutilization. So Don provides a framework for that. He also talked about the span of whip constraints across the system, that Kanban tends to be local, so a series of Kanban are implemented if you want to span across a wider system from a demand source to a delivery capability on the other end. Other examples would be things like ConWhip or DBR, CapWhip, figure constraints implementations, which are more global in nature in terms of the way they limit the whip in the system. And he made this observation that larger spans cause feedback delays leading to long loop closure times. In other words, we don't learn so quickly from systems that span large parts of our workflow or our value stream. Hence an argument that Kanban systems actually work better for learning, and that whip constraints in general are a more powerful concept than pull systems. He went on to talk about the idea of whip controls, which is policies tuned to specific domain risks for controlling the dynamic adjustment of whip constraints. And he made some observations about demand-focused approaches, including blocking entry, which is the Toyota Kanban approach, and something he called purge whip. Then he looked at supply-focused approaches, which mostly involve resource pooling and cross-training workers, flexible experts, part-time workers for staff augmentation, and the concept of T-shaped people who are quite good at a number of activities and then very good at one narrow activity. And then he talked about the idea of a mixed focus, which is whip control policies that can be flexible across demand and supply focused problems. And that's really what we're doing with the Kanban method for knowledge work. In other words, Kanban in knowledge work is going far beyond a typical Toyota manufacturing Kanban system, and is really embracing all the concepts within his whip controls definition. Okay, so that was that. I think it would be very worthwhile for you to check out the video or the slides of Don Rennertson's keynote from the tour. A little bit on Little's Law. Those of you who are familiar with this will know that we use Little's Law to predict how much we can get done in a period of time through a Kanban system. But first of all, just one or two definitions. In my own presentations, I presented this definition of lead and cycle time. And in this example, what I'm looking at is the system lead time, the lead time through the Kanban system from the commitment point, which is when we pull something, in this case, into this engineering ready buffer, the input. That's when the clock starts ticking on the lead time. Until that point, everything in the backlog is essentially an option, and we haven't taken the customer's order until we've committed on it. So our commitment point is when we pull something into engineering ready, and the lead time ends when the item reaches the first infinite queue. The infinite queue is decoupling the Kanban system from some other system. In this case, it's essentially some sort of batched delivery system. Perhaps we collect completed work over a period of time, like 2 weeks or a month, and then we deliver that entire batch using a time-boxed cadence. So the infinite queue is decoupling the pull system from the batch and queue cadence system for delivery. And measuring lead time this way, between engineering ready and the first infinite queue, provides us the correct result for Little's Law and our cumulative flow diagram, which I'll up in a moment. Meanwhile, the term cycle time is really ambiguous. It has to be qualified. For example, here I'm showing the development cycle time, the period of time it takes tickets to flow through the development as opposed to testing or any queuing prior to that. Whereas end-to-end cycle time, the time from first commitment to delivery, be this, it would be from when we pull something into engineering ready until it's actually delivered to the customer. When Donald Reinertson's talking about cycle time in his material, this is what he's referring to, the end-to-end cycle time from the point of customer commitment to delivery. So the Little's Law equation can be written in a number of ways, but this is perhaps the most common way we see with Kanban and knowledge work, that the average delivery rate is equal to the work in progress divided by the average lead time. And we can see this displayed on this cumulative flow diagram here, that the height of the width divided by the length of the lead time there will give us the slope, which is the average delivery rate. So it's visually reinforced in the cumulative flow diagram that we can understand the equation. And we use this equation for predicting how long it will take to complete a collection of work, turning a pool of ideas into material that's ready for deployment. However, we need to be careful how we're using Little's Law, and Daniel Vacanti presented a session on this topic, and what I have here is a photograph of the visual facilitator's sketch of that session. So you see the ticket at the top there, Little's Law by Daniel Vacanti, and he's written the equation transposing the lead time and the throughput there, but it's essentially the width divided by the throughput equals the lead time, but it's equivalent to what I showed on the previous slide. And then 5 things for us to keep in mind: that all the measurements have to be in consistent units. All items that enter the system get completed and should exit. In other words, from when we commit on something in our Kanban system, we only want to be committing on things that we're really positive we will deliver. The upstream upstream of our commitment, our backlog, those things can be optional, but when we commit, we should really finish it. We don't want things being discarded or abandoned. And then 3 is our average arrival rate equals our average departure rate. 4 is the average of the WIP is not increasing or decreasing during the time that we're sampling it. And the average amount of WIP is the same at the beginning and the end of the period. And if all those things are true, then Little's Law will work. What you should take away from this is that Kanban systems really provide us the certainty on controlling the WIP that enables us to use Little's Law for very effective long-term planning. Without a Kanban system in an unlimited WIP system or in a managed, we're not using a WIP constraint, Little's Law is less likely to give us accurate predictions. Kanban system liquidity is an idea I introduced during my Vienna keynote and then talked some more about during the Utrecht keynote. And I describe this as currently experimental work, and I'm collaborating with Raymond Keating from the CME group, amongst other people, on this idea. And it came from this question of where's the best place to place a work order for really optimal risk management. If you're a customer within a bigger company and you need some software developed, which department would you send that request to? Well, it turns out that in terms of knowing where to place a bet, investment bankers have an answer to this, that they prefer to place orders in liquid markets. In a highly liquid market, they have a trust that an order will be fulfilled accurately, quickly, and at the correct price. Highly liquid markets are markets with a high level of trust, and high liquidity inherently gives us a high confidence in that market. So that begs the question, could we view Kanban systems as markets for software development and therefore assess the liquidity? And this would enable customers to be able to choose which department or indeed which vendor to place a particular order with. So first of all, just a quick understanding of liquidity. In this example, it's a housing market example, and we have sellers of yellow houses, green houses, and purple houses. And then we have yellow, purple, pink buyers. And we have some bank which is available to lend some money, and we also have a cash buyer in our market. So if we look here, this yellow buyer sees a yellow house that he wants to buy, and the bank lends him the money for a mortgage, so he's able to make the purchase. In this example, we have a cash buyer, and he's looking for a yellow house, and he finds one, and he pays cash, so the transaction takes place. And then in the example, we have a purple buyer looking for a purple house, and again, the bank steps up and provides the money so that he can close that transaction. So in this instance, 3 out of 4 houses are sold, and 3 out of 4 buyers are satisfied. And that's a relatively liquid market. It's not perfect because 1 house remains unsold and 1 buyer remains unsatisfied, but a relatively liquid market. So measuring liquidity required is that we've got buyers and sellers and that we have cash. And when these conditions are present, transactions will take place. More transactions, the more liquid the market. Market liquidity measured as the transaction. So the question would be, how would we measure where are the transactions in a Kanban system? I have some examples there in the slide. So here we have a Kanban system, and you see that we've colored the tickets and we've colored the workers on this system just to highlight some specialization or needs for specialization. And you notice that in our testing column there, we have a green worker, but at this moment in time, the only ticket available for him to work on is a yellow ticket. The result is that you can't pull that ticket, you can't work on it. So there's a mismatch between the required skills and the skills the worker has. So when we have well-matched workers and tickets, we get work flowing freely through the system. So now we see that we have added some additional workers to this department, and we've increased our width limits at the top of the columns. And now we have some red and yellow developers, and you see they have red and yellow tickets available so they can pull those. We also have some multi-skilled workers. You see that we have a red and yellow worker who's capable of pulling red or yellow tickets. And as a result of the grip and greater number of work, we now have a more liquid system. There's more opportunity for the work to flow, and of course, higher utilization and greater flow efficiency in our system. More width has increased the liquidity and increased the flow, but of course also increased our cost, because we need more workers. So liquidity is measured by volume through transactions in the system. And I'm proposing that measure of system liquidity. Some work still needs to be done on how we would normalize that across one system and another. Perhaps we could look at pool transactions per person. Greater values for pool transaction volume serve to show us the most trustworthy system. They represent the system that's most likely to offer the most predictable results. Liquidity is a good metric. Donald Brennan, in his 1997 book, Managing the Design Factory, defined 4 criteria for good metrics. They should be very simple, they should be self-generating, they should be relevant, and they should be leading indicators, preferably, because a leading indicator tells us something about the future. It helps us make a prediction, whereas a lagging indicator is something that tells us only about the past. And if we only ever use lagging indicators, we can't make decisions. We can only make observations about what happened in the past. So we're interested in leading indicators. And in addition to that, liquidity is a global system measure. So driving it up shouldn't cause local optimization or undesired consequences. You'll notice that on the right-hand side here, I put some lead time distributions for tickets moving through these Kanban systems. And these represent the observed capability, how long does it take a ticket to move through the system, and how many tickets take a certain period of time. And these lead time distribution graphs are very common within the Kanban community, and tools like swift-kanban are capable of drawing these for you. The problem with them is that they're lagging indicators. They only tell you about the past, they don't help you predict the future. And therefore, I believe that if combine a liquidity with a lead time distribution, we'll be able to understand the past and make a prediction about the future in terms of how consistent should our future be with how the past occurred. So if we were to see a significant change in liquidity, that would tell us that our historical lead time distribution graph is probably unreliable, and that we might want to take some management action to avoid problems occurring. So the summary here is that some Kanban systems may appear faster and cheaper, but they'll carry more inherent risk as they have poorer liquidity, they handle less variety, they're less resilient. slightly longer to deliver, but with greater certainty. You know, a more liquid system, even if it was a little slower, might actually be preferred by many customers. So I've summarized this very quickly here. There was a lot more depth to this in the main presentation, and expect to hear more about real liquidity in Kanban systems over the coming year. And the relevance of this is essentially that highly liquid systems will give us a narrower spread of variation and should allow us to make more accurate predictions about when we'll finish larger projects, and you know, to price those more accurately, and then to monitor that using the leading indicator of liquidity rather than the lagging indicator of lead time as we progress through the project. So the result would, in highly liquid Kanban system, our plans would carry less buffer for variation, and the net result of that is that our planning horizons can be shorter with the same degree of certainty, and that's very clearly important for business agility. Next up, we've got Kanban Kata, and Kanban Kata was presented by Håkan Fors and inspired by the Toyota Kata. Steve Medland presented Toyota Kata two of our events, and he was followed by Håkan Fors, who provided his interpretation of it for Kanban. I can't possibly summarize the whole presentation, but the critical concept for me, and something that really existed in our 2007 Kanban implementation with Corbis, and is more or less documented in the Kanban book, looks like this. There are 3 Kanban kata that Håkan is proposing: the daily meeting, what he calls the improvement kata, and the operations review. And it's the middle one here that I omitted to include in the Kanban book. It just struck me as so obvious and just simply what managers do that it didn't occur to me to include it as part of the process. I might fix that in a future edition of the book. So the daily meeting, and I've shown here a sketch of the cartoon that's on the cover of the Kanban book. That's the opportunity for people to reflect on how well things are flowing and what might be done about it. At the other end of the scale, the operations review, on the other hand, tends to be an organizational level meeting, and it's more quantitative and objective and metrics driven, where we're looking at the interaction between different Kanban systems and looking at how at an organization level we might improve. The critical piece here is this improvement kata in the middle, which is typically the relationship between a mentor and a mentee, or a manager and a subordinate. And in this little sketch, it's quite hard to see it, but we actually have a middle manager, and he's standing there with 3 line managers, and he's sharing some knowledge and expertise. And they're talking about potential improvements and things that they could be doing with their immediate departments to generate improvements. And you'll see the arrows between these 3 things represent how they interact, that feedback from daily meetings can be fed into improvement kata conversations, which in turn should then show up as improvements that can be observed at the daily meetings. And equally, operations review will provide information for improvement kata discussions, and actions taken as a result of an improvement kata discussion should also show up in metrics and can be reflected during the operations review. So I think that we're going to hear a lot more about Kanban kata over the coming years, and it's going to become a core piece of the Kanban method. There is definitely some debate about some of the detail, and I know that some of you may have followed this on Twitter. So I'm expecting some refinement over Håkan's current ideas, but By and large, I think Kanban Kata is a major piece of the Kanban method going forward. So that's the summary of the conference tour. And just on the back end of this presentation, I thought it would be good to summarize what's happening with Lean Kanban University and accredited Kanban training. I know there's a considerable amount of ambiguity and perhaps some misunderstanding of what's happening with Kanban University. So this was an opportunity to summarize for you the official position of Lean Kanban University. An accredited Kanban training program, and in order to offer accredited Kanban training, a company must be a member of LKU, and to become a member they need to have been approved by the advisory board. In other words, we don't just let any company join the organization. They need to have some dedication to developing the Kanban market, the Kanban community, and a good understanding of the Kanban method. The trainers must be certified and carry the accredited Kanban trainer designation, so they're known as AKTs. And training material must have been approved. That means it's been reviewed by LKU staff, typically Mike Burrows. I'm sure some of you on this call will know Mike. And he reviews the submitted training materials against the standard curriculum that's been defined by LKU. So LKU then certifies the training that's offered by its member companies as being of a good quality standard. LKU trainers, the AKTs, they have significant field experience as trainers and or coaches teaching and leading Kanban implementations. New trainers must attend a 5-day residential training course to learn how to teach the standard 1- and 2-day classes. The first of those 5-day training courses was held in Edinburgh, Scotland, the week after the Lean Agile Scotland conference in September. And it was taught by myself, Daniel Vacanti, and Janice Linden-Reed. Trainers must maintain their skills by attending LKU events, Kanban leadership retreats, and involvement in the community, and that will be monitored on an annual basis. So, Kanban training options for you, the potential student. Currently, certified training is offered at 2 levels. There's a 1-day introductory level and a 2-day practitioner level. The introductory training is really designed to make people literate about Kanban concepts, while the practitioner training is intended for those who must work with Kanban on a daily basis. While it's certainly true that people leading Kanban initiatives have often only taken the 2-day training, the practitioner training is not really intended as a coach training. It's intended for workers who need to be part of an organization that's using the Kanban method. For companies that are marketing Kanban training, the training companies have considerable freedom to tailor and customize the training as long as they're covering the standard curriculum. As a result, the title of the classes varies by company and in some cases individual trainers. But regardless of the title, it will always be advertised as the LKU introductory class or the LKU practitioner level class, and those introductory or practitioner refer to the level of the curriculum. So you will see niche market customizations for topics such as IT operations, system engineering, large projects, simulation and measurement. And I'm sure that more of these will become common over the next few months and years. The certified training itself, each attendee receives a nice certificate like this one here. And I believe this is actually a real one that we're displaying here. And this is a class taught by Arne Rook of IT Agile in Germany, and it's called Kanban Basics, and it's an introductory level class, a one-day class. So this certificate validates that the student actually attended the class, and the record is stored electronically on leankanbanuniversity.com, where students can download their certificates. In future, students completing classes will be given membership of the website, and we anticipate developing some functionality there for, storing training history and doing career development and so forth. I mentioned earlier that two-day class is not really intended for Kanban initiatives, and there's now the Kanban Coaching Professional designation, which is a new certification for consultants and corporate change agents. In order to achieve this status, you must have completed the advanced 3-day Kanban Coaching and Leadership Masterclass with me. And right now, I'm the only person that offers this level of class. That's likely to change in the future, but not before I've written a book that's aimed at this level of practitioner, the coach or corporate change agent. In addition to taking the class, they must gain field experience, and then they must pass a panel interview with members of the KCP Advisory Board, who are 10 of the best-known Kanban coaches in the world, including people like Laurent Morisseau from France, Klaus Leopold from Austria, and if you need a full list of the advisory board, we can provide that. And KCPs are encouraged but not compelled to attend community events and Kanban leadership retreats. So what's next for Lean Kanban University? We'd actually like to hear from you, and you see my email addresses in the bottom left of your screen. What kind of programs would you like LKU to be offering? We're currently considering a number of future directions, including things like a Lean requirements training program, a Lean risk management training program, and potentially a Lean software development practices training program. Would these interest you? And what would you like to see as part of such a curriculum? Would it be useful for you in your career development or the career development of your staff or people within your organization? Please let us know. But very recently, the idea was on the Kanban Dev email list that perhaps there's a need for Kanban appraisals, if you like, an organization level Kanban certification that would determine just how well an organization is using the Kanban method and how well they've developed their evolutionary capability. And this could perhaps be based on the depth of Kanban implementation that I discussed in the previous swift-kanban webinar just before summer. And would this be interesting to you? Could you imagine your organization being interested in the Kanban or evolutionary capability appraisal at the team or department, business unit, or even entire company level? So again, if you think this is something that Lean Kanban University should be looking into and developing, we'd love to hear from you. And just as a reminder, this is the depth of Kanban appraisal framework that I presented last time, that looks at the 6 core practices in the Kanban method: visualize, limit width, manage flow, make process policies explicit, implement feedback loops, in this case the Kanban cata, and then conducting improvements using a scientific approach. This gives us a way of essentially making an assessment of how deep a Kanban implementation actually is, where a small footprint on this diagram would be a shallow implementation, and a much wider footprint, larger volume on or area covered on this chart would be a deeper implementation. So if you think that Kanban appraisals would be something useful that LKU should develop, please let us know. Equally, if you think that that might have a negative effect on the market, we'd also love to hear that opinion. You can either email that to me or feel free to voice it on social media like the Kanban Dev mailing list on Yahoo or the IT Kanban list on LinkedIn. And that's it for the official presentation. So I thank you for listening. Thanks for your attention. We're going to open the floor now to your questions. There's some acknowledgements here for some of the content that I used presentation. Would you like to open the floor for questions?
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's great presentation and a great summary of some of the sort of hot topics being discussed in the Kanban community at this point. So just a note to all the participants that if you'd like to ask a question to David, just click on that hand icon that you see in the attendee or in the participant window that you probably see on the right hand side of your screen, or if you'd like to just go ahead and type in a question on the Q&A box, that's also fine. We can read off your question and let others know what the question is. So David, while people are putting in the questions, let me go ahead and start with one, a couple of them actually, based on the presentation that you asked. That the Kanban system liquidity sounded like a really interesting concept, especially from the sort of market representation, as you put it, in the way that there might be arbitrage, there might be sort of negotiation between people who are completing work and people who might next want to take up some work, and the overall impact of the sort of variety of work and the variety of skills that are available here. But in the overall sort of impact of this liquidity as a metric, is it similar to the throughput metric? Sort of intuitively, they sound like liquidity and throughput, they might have some interrelation. Are they similar, or are they quite different?
That's a good question. The throughput would be the measure of the number of tickets moving into the final column on the board, or completing their journey through the Kanban system. So if we were only measuring the pool transactions at that final stage, then throughput and the liquidity measure would be the same. However, what we're doing here is collecting all the pool transactions in the whole system. And exactly how that relates to throughput, I think we still need more data to correlate that. We haven't specifically correlated it with the data we've been using, so I'll need to look into it.
Okay. So there are a couple of questions that have been entered on the chat window. I'm going to go ahead and ask the question, and if there are clarifications, I'd request the people who are asking the question for any additional clarifying information. So the first one is from Rathikant Panigrahi, and his question is: if the test is not passed for developed code, how to manage the card on the board? And I guess this has some impact on looping back and rework type of issue, I guess.
Yeah, so this is probably the most frequently asked question, that if a card that's in the testing column has failed its tests, or a bug, or more than one perhaps, has been found, what should you do with the ticket? And as Mahesh points out, it's all to do with policy about looping back and rework, because finding a bug in something is just a general case of, or it's a specific case of the general problem. What do we do with something that needs rework? And there's a spectrum of available choices. It might be good if I could illustrate this with the Kanban system while I'm talking, so let me see if I can find a picture. So in this example, we're talking about in the acceptance call there, which it fails acceptance testing. So what should we do? Well, we have a number of too many tickets to be in that condition, and the test ticket in situation, organizations do not have the level of maturity to cope with it well. In addition to that, perhaps they generate a large number of defects, and therefore if they pursued such a hard choice, a harsh policy of stop them, what would be large numbers of people sitting idle waiting for bugs to be fixed. And if there's a low level of organizational maturity, often coupled with a very low level of managerial patience, the result is that the Kanban system will take the blame for the problem rather than be rewarded for highlighting what's really a problem elsewhere. So leaving it in situation, it's a higher maturity choice, and it will work well for organizations where defects are relatively seldom and the managers are quite patient. On the other hand, the other extreme in this situation would be to take our ticket from acceptance testing and move it the whole way back into potentially just a pool of ideas. And then it would have to be pulled into our engineering ready queue when we had space for it. And they would have to compete with other ideas in order to get attention. And the bottom line is that we'd have some code we've developed and it's broken and it's not being fixed and time is going by. So eventually we might pull it into engineering ready, and we might then pull it into development and fix the bugs and move it through testing again. And it could be several weeks or months since we found the defects in the first place. The net result is that all that time, other code we've been developing will have been developed against a piece of code that was broken, if there's any dependencies in the code base. And in addition, Alan Shalloway uses a term called induced work, which says that if you were to fix a bug within, say, half an hour of finding it, or you find the bug and fix it within a half an hour of creating it, the likelihood is it might take you only a few minutes. But if you allow weeks or months to go by between creating the bug and then trying to fix it, it may take hours, days, or even weeks to fix. So the amount of effort involved in fixing it gets larger also. So there's a couple of things going on there. There's a potential regression effect of coding other things against something that's broken, and there's the additional cost that you pay for fixing it later. But the trade-off is that you keep the work flowing. You'll actually have greater system liquidity if you send the tickets backwards. You'll have a higher flow efficiency. You'll have higher utilization rates. And as a result, managers will be happier. Generally, in lower maturity organizations with impatient managers, it's a better choice to send the tickets backwards. Now, I've described the two extremes there, the stop the line extreme and they move it the whole way back to the pool of ideas. But actually, a number of other options are possible. There's the option to leave it in test but not count it against the width limit. There's the option to move it back to development and have it jump the queue, ask developers to stop what they're doing, switch to fixing the bug, but the ticket is in the development column and not in the testing column. You can imagine that there may be as many as 10 different combinations we could come up with. And all of these, they represent policies for managing the tickets and managing the risks that we have, not just of the quality in the work itself, but in the flow of work, the flow efficiency, the liquidity in the system, the utilization rate. So there's political risk as well as business risk being managed with these policies. And the correct policies for your organization will be somewhat unique to your specific situation and need to be evaluated on their own. There is no right or wrong answer here. The real answer is it depends. And what I've done is describe the framework to help you make your own decision.
Right, and I think in that you probably addressed a number of other questions that were similar in terms of policy definition, board design, handling of rework. So if you look at the Q&A panel, you will see a follow-up question from Ratikant, from Christopher Wigington, as well as Paul Marsh on what do you do with bugs, and sort of how do you define WIP limits and so forth. I'm trying to decide which is the logical question to ask here. Chris has also said that his real question was really about rework scenario as well. So I guess it's been answered. One of the questions that Ratikant has asked is that there is the issue of dependency on internal and external teams that card used to block, and therefore sometimes it can be difficult to manage WIP limits. But again, I suspect that's a policy definition issue as to how you want to manage WIP limits when you have dependency with external teams. And Paul's question at the end says what to do with the bug. He prefers placing it in the engineering ready queue regardless of the WIP limit, and they just have higher priority.
Yeah. So what he's saying is that work returned backwards on the board is then given a higher class of service for its second pass through the board, and that's a perfectly valid choice. And again, it'll be the right choice for him in his situation.
Right, absolutely. Just to share our own experience in our board design and the way we manage new user stories or enhancements versus bugs, is that anything, as long as it's a bug, it gets the highest priority, whether it is coming in for the first time or whether it is it comes in as a repeat or a recurring bug. So therefore, to that extent, we also ignore WIP limit, and bugs go through first. Other items follow. Let me go ahead and take up a question about liquidity, and something that Andrew's asked, which also was something that is intriguing me. Andrew's question was that he understands how increasing WIP can increase liquidity and therefore increase flow, but Kanban literature has said for long that limiting WIP tends to drive process improvement and flow. So how do both statements are true? How do they sort of reconcile with each other?
The way he's asking the question, Andrew appears to be suggesting that having higher WIP limits and greater liquidity isn't a process improvement, and therefore I think that the juxtaposition of these two ideas in the question is wrong. That the result of having a low WIP limit and low utilization and poor flow efficiency and low liquidity in the system, the discussion that happens after that might be, let's increase the WIP limits. Actually increasing a WIP limit can be a process improvement in itself, and I described examples of that in the Kanban book. For example, if you have a non-instant availability problem, you might increase the width limit on a buffer in front of the non-instant availability person or resource. And therefore, we're not limiting WIP here. We're still limiting WIP, and in that sense, it will still drive process improvements and flow. Increasing WIP limits shouldn't be seen as a negative thing if it actually produces better results. The goal is not to have the lowest WIP limits. The goal is to have the best business outcome, however that's being measured in terms of the business risks under management. Certainly it's true that a system with very low limits and very smooth flow will have a very low cost of operation. So a team full of generalists that can flow work very smoothly with a low WIP limit, that will be very low cost. So it's efficient from a cost perspective, but is it efficient from a business risk perspective? That's difficult to judge. If it's a business that requires specialists in order to function and be profitable or to be competitive, then having a team full of generalists that can flow work smoothly is all very well, but what they'll be delivering will actually not be good enough for the market. They'll be delivering work of insufficient quality because they don't have these specialist skills. And we find lots of industries where they need a significant number of specialists in order to be competitive.
So David, that almost sounds like that this would be applicable in a Kanban system where there is a large number of players. There is a large number of people with varying skills that you would have the ability to look at that variety and be able to pick and choose what work you will take and who will do that work. Has there been a discussion around that in terms of what size of teams this might reflect better? Or is that true for any team size?
I think it's too early days in terms of gathering data on this, Mahesh, but the point is that a metric like this should work equally with large Kanban systems where there's a large heterogeneous collection of work and lots of specialists in the workforce, and it should work just as well for measuring systems where there's more homogeneous work and perhaps a set of generalists that can flow that work very smoothly. What it will be able to do is provide a way of measuring the carrying cost of the work in progress and demonstrating that more generalist workforce with more homogeneous work actually costs less. And it will make that very clear and provide a way of normalizing it. And this will hopefully help business people to make good economic decisions. It will provide them with an economic framework for assessing, do we want to drive our costs down and to be able to flow work more efficiently at lower cost, the outcome of which might be that the work is of a narrower variety and perhaps less compelling in the market? Or do we want to really try to provide differentiated product or services which require specialist skills, but and therefore could be a lot more profitable, but those carry higher costs? and it will really, I believe, help to frame those decisions. But still early days. Let's see where we get with this over the next couple of years.
Right. I find it also very exciting because, as you know, we have a lot of customers, especially on our ALM side, who are IT services companies or system integrators, and they're doing outsourced projects for corporate customers. And this sounds like a very applicable tool to sort of, as you said, to sort of arbitrage between high quality, high cost work versus and specialized work versus something that is maintenance and low cost, low risk, and sort of load balancing between the various streams of work that an organization might want to do.
And I think it's a metric that's very easy for you guys to collect.
Yes, right. Right.
So it really does fit into Don Reinertson's category for good metrics. It's easy to collect. It's really auto-generating. It should be easy to report. The remaining question is, how valuable is it? Can we develop some good guidance around how to interpret system liquidity information? And if we can solve that problem adequately, then we've done something very useful.
Yep.
I see we have one or two other questions here. We have Christopher Wigington asking about graphic design teams and how would we go about implementing a Kanban system for a situation where a designer designs something and then it has to be reviewed and then redesigned and then reviewed, etc., until the design is done. To be honest, with these situations, we work from first principles, and those first principles don't change, whether it's a design activity like this or a software development activity. We look at what the workflow is in terms of the development of the knowledge and information in what's being created, this creative piece of work. And if it, the question here is very terse in terms of its description of the workflow. If the designer had an iterative process where they actually could articulate different activities being performed, and you could imagine this with an artist, that they might prepare a canvas, they might make a sketch, they might do some large area colouring, they then might iterate on it again with more fine detail until gradually they have a finished artwork, a finished painting. We might potentially design a Kanban board that had different lanes on the board for each of those activities, even though they're performed by the same person. And in this situation we are talking about designing and then reviewing. If we were to replace our development and testing columns on this board that we're viewing at the moment with design and review, then it could be that tickets have to iterate back and forward. I've seen situations where people change the color of the ticket if it loops around. If you have some access to tickets in a wide variety of colors, you can use slightly darker versions of the same color, and something iterates multiple times. Or you can divide the board into rows, and each time it's sent backwards, it moves down a row. And you could implement different policies for those rows so that as things get older, they get more attention. Because something that's old and has been iterated on many times, we either want to go with it or we want to discard it. We don't want to keep spending an infinite amount of time and money on it. So it's really not that different of a problem from any other creative activity that's performed as a service. We analyze the workflow, we look at the business risks, we look at which of those risks need to be visualized on the board, and we have a number of dimensions that we can use. We can use columns left to right, we can use rows top to bottom, we can use the color of the tickets, and we can also decorate the tickets with with icons that might highlight certain risks that we want to be aware of. So it's really the standard process. I know that the book talks about software development, but in a situation like Christopher's, we don't change the way that we go about it.
And in certain tools such as swift-kanban, what we provide is the ability to, like you said, annotate a ticket or basically convert it into a different type of a work item to, collect data against any sort of rework or any kind of repeat work. There are features such as converting a ticket from one type to another and carrying over all of the data. That helps you sort of club all of that work in one category of work, which you can then analyze separately.
Yeah, there's another liquidity question here
Yes.
from Paul Marsh, who asks, how does liquidity relate to allowing a blocked lane to be cleared by people who are not experts, e.g. developers helping to test? Actually, that would be observed as improved liquidity. In other words, creating policy that says developers with slack time can help testers complete testing, that's an improvement in system liquidity. I think that's a perfectly valid outcome. The liquidity in itself would not be the only measure that you would consider in making a decision. You will consider things like the lead time distribution and the quality that's being delivered coming out the end. So if your policy that allows developers to help with testing resulted in significant reduction in delivered quality, and therefore perhaps an increase in the quantity of production defects coming back as failure demand, that would have to be considered in conjunction. That you may have got improved liquidity, but was it worth it? All these things need to be framed in an economic decision-making framework.
All right. We have probably about another 5 to 7 minutes remaining for the 90-minute mark. So if there are any other questions that anyone would like to ask, please go ahead and do so. In the meantime, David, I thought I'll check with you about a couple of topics that you mentioned during your presentation. One was about the depth of Kanban, and that is a topic that you introduced in our previous town hall that we had in July, and I think it has generated a tremendous amount of interest in teams that are and organizations that are wanting to establish where they stand in their overall implementation of Kanban, not only within themselves but also perhaps in relation to what others might be doing. So in terms of actual use of that tool, what has been your finding? Have you seen a lot of organizations adopt it, and is there scope for automating some of that?
Let me start with the first half of that question. So, yes, I've been really impressed with the number of organizations that seem to have taken to this concept. We've also seen two flavors of it develop. There's the flavor similar, actually as I presented or similar, where the axes on the diagram have very specific elements described on each of the notches. So let's call that the absolute assessment approach, where we're defining a number of activities or practices, and then we can look for evidence that those practices are being performed, and we can make some absolute marks on the chart. I even found one larger company in Sweden where they had added a seventh axis to that chart, and then they had developed something in the region of 10 or 11 notches on each of the axes with, with a taxonomy for each one, and then colored those either red, orange, or green, indicating that they consider the red ones to be like the minimum level of implementation, and then orange was better and green was very good. So the absolute assessment has definitely caught on and has interested a number of companies, usually larger companies and companies that are interested in making sort of cross-organizational level assessments. And we're seeing variety and adaptation within that. At the same time, there's another branch where, inspired by the same idea and the same six-dimensional chart, they have gone off and used those charts in a relative fashion, where typically, to use an example, they might say, okay, the middle of the chart represents where we are now, or where we started, and the extreme outside of the axis represents where we'd like to be in the future. Now tell us where we are right now. And that relative assessment can therefore be used within an individual team or across an individual Kanban system as a way of assessing progress towards some sort of goal that's defined as where we'd like to be in terms of visualization or in terms of limiting width or making policies explicit, for example. So there's been quite a bit of activity on this relative assessment approach also, and a number of people blogging about it. People have been completing these charts, both absolute and relative ones, and then loading them up on the limitedwhipsociety.org website, and sharing them in other public forums. So the depth of Kanban does seem to be an activity that's got some momentum behind it. And it's interesting that we've seen both this absolute school of thought, which is mostly about comparative appraisal, and then this relative school of thought, which is about driving improvement within a single Kanban system. So that's part of really an improvement cata type of approach.
Right.
And I think both of those are really valid, and they're a little different. So it will be interesting to see how it all develops over the next 6 months to 18 months, and where we end up with that. We may end up with recommendations on how to use both the absolute and the relative approaches. And then the second half of your question was, could it be automated? And I haven't put a lot of thought into that yet, but I can imagine that tool vendors like yourselves are looking at it, that it wouldn't surprise me if some of your bigger corporate clients are really quite enthusiastic, and therefore if the tool could facilitate the appraisal mechanism, that would be useful. And certainly if we were to get demand for the appraisal suggestion I had in the webinar today, therefore you would be getting demand for tool support to support the appraisal. So I think something for the future, and these things always take way longer to develop in the market than you might think. So it won't surprise me if 2 or 3 years from now we're having the same discussion again.
Right. And I think one of the things that one of our customers sort of pointed out was that in order to do a proper assessment, there was a fair bit of data collection that needed to be done outside of the Kanban board, and therefore outside of the Kanban tool, perhaps. And so it would take some time to sort of figure that out, to see how you might have it all in one place where you can present it in some sort of a dashboard view. The other question, David, was more of a sort of market industry type of a question. The Boston conference this year, you talked a little bit about it, and I think a couple of other people also referred to the sort of crossing the chasm phenomenon that was taking place in the Kanban land, so to speak. How do you see that as you finish the European conferences and sort of level of activity that you see there?
Yeah, so for those who may have heard this term, crossing the chasm, it refers to a phenomenon in market adoption described by Geoffrey Moore, where he observed that markets often stall when early adopters have adopted, but mainstream market buyers are not ready to adopt. And we've definitely observed some of that phenomenon in the United States and in parts of Europe with Kanban adoption over the last 9 months or so. And I'd say that, Mahesh, that situation continues. Where are we with it right now? Looking at the audiences that were attending the Central Europe and the Netherlands conferences, I'd say we were seeing a significant number of mainstream market buyers, people from larger companies, more conservative organizations, and perhaps more senior, certainly middle managers and higher ranking middle managers in organizations. And the early enthusiasts who are just doing it because it's cool, not so much of them anymore. And that affected the attendance a little bit, that we had seen not that large numbers of people returning from earlier year events because we're transitioning to this more mainstream market. And I think we're also seeing those people showing up and saying, we've got a real business problem that we want to deal with, we want to run an initiative, and we're looking to do something, move forward, and spend money, commit investment to improvements. And I think overall that's good news for tool vendors like yourselves and for consultants and training companies. But in the current economy, it's challenging because in the United States, I think companies were holding off on investment decisions with it being a presidential election year. We also saw this year a lot of people holding on to budget until the final quarter. They didn't want to spend money too early in the year. And then in Europe, the European economies are definitely challenged. So it's the European market is not growing terribly quickly, with perhaps the exception of Sweden and the German-speaking countries. The rest of the market is developing, but for most of the players, consultants, trainers, software tool vendors, it's slow going because people are being very cautious with how they're spending money.
Right. And I think as an overall market, we are seeing certainly some of that ourselves, and of course we continue to be optimistic about the future. And we've seen a number of large companies take their time to make the decision, but as they are making the decision, and once they do so, the adoption is certainly very rapid in some of these companies. So we look forward to the next 6 to 12 months to see how quickly some of these move in the market. So David, with that, I think we've come to the end of the 90-minute time, and I'd like to thank you once again very much for a very insightful presentation and share some of the developments going on in the industry overall, and especially in Europe. I hope that all of the people who attended the session today would have derived sort of maximum value for the time based on the presentation that David did, as well as the Q&A that followed, which are always highly educational as well as very enjoyable. So David, thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Mahesh, and thanks everyone for joining the presentation today.
Wonderful. And so if any of you like to get in touch with us, both David and with the Digit and swift-kanban teams, the contact information is available on the slide here, and we will be sending out follow-up emails to everyone who was on the call today with links for the recording of the webinar as well as the slides, so that you have that available to you for your own use as well. Thanks a lot, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.